Good afternoon, everyone from East Coast of the United States. My name is Brian Darmody with AURP, and I am in the WeWork in the University of Maryland Discovery District. And I'd like to welcome folks to our peer-to-peer. We have a special topic today with the Federal Lab Consortium. So some of you may know I worked at the University of Maryland for many years, and one of my jobs was recruiting federal labs to our research park. So we had the FDA Center for Food Safety, we had a USDA Agricultural and Plant Health Inspection Service. We had parts of the Intel community that I can't tell you the full name of that center. But anyway, over those years, I became acquainted with the Federal Lab Consortium and its important role in helping develop tech transfer and partnerships among federal labs. Many of our research parks are near federal labs, and we even have some federal labs that are members, like Sandia Research Park in New Mexico is a member, or some of our parks are near federal labs like Brookhaven National Lab and SUNY Stony Brook in New York, and there are other examples, across the country. So I thought this would be a pretty interesting way to expose our group to the Federal Lab Consortium. And on the federal side, there's new funding mechanisms going into federal labs. There's new partnership opportunities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues, Paul and Corin from the Federal Lab Consortium, and they're going to give you an overview and talk to you about ways you can, in your own community, work with your federal labs. So Paul and Corin, I turn it over to you. And folks, please, you can keep your cameras on. We love to see you, but please mute your mics until we have questions. Thanks.
Very good. Well, hello, and thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today. As Brian said, we have laboratories all over the place, and we're very much engaged across the communities, across the country. I've known Brian for quite a long time. I'm actually from Maryland as well. I'm sitting in Maryland now, so very engaged in that ecosystem and really excited about working with you all. So what is the FLC? Let's start with that one. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what we are actually a nationwide network of all of the federal laboratories. So we actually sit under a piece in legislation where Congress says there isn't a Federal Lab Consortium for technology transfer. So we have our own little special piece of the law. It's actually within the Federal Technology Transfer Act. We actually go back earlier than that with some informal organizations of groups of people that just really felt it was important to talk. But Congress basically said this is going to exist. So it's interesting because all of the federal labs are, by Congress, members of this organization, which creates its own little unique, interesting, good things and unique, interesting, not so good things. One of them is, of course, we don't do memberships or anything like that. So that's kind of a big advantage that we have. We don't have to do that. But the flip side is, we get people that say, well, I don't know if I'm a member, which if you can believe that, because they don't really have to actively do anything to be a member. So if you're a lab, you're a member. We have lots of labs at that. So we have, you'll see on this slide, we use the number of 300. These are kind of like the large labs, but when you get down to it, we just did a census. So we're at over 1,700 locations all over the country. So the chances are there is one of our federal labs not far from where you are, no matter where you are, simply because there's so many of them. Some of these aren't actually, so we do expand a little bit with some of the more interesting research pieces, even through things like the Veterans Administration and some of the work they do even at some of the VA hospitals. So some of them are a little bit more, creative, I suppose you could look at it. We count the International Space Station as one of our federal laboratories. So we've got a lot of different things, but it's an interesting thing because we usually have somebody that's interested in working in the area of science that someone is interested in partnering with us for. So put all told, this is actually almost a little outdated given all the spending we've been doing lately, but 150 billion about a year or two ago. We're probably closer to 160, 170 billion dollars of investment of your tax dollars in federal research and development. Now, not all of that's done at the labs. A lot of that goes out through grants, roughly a third is actually within the budget of the labs themselves, but it's all integrated together. So, you don't really want to think of it as completely separate, because the fact is all of these things do work together, and they do make up the full research portfolio of this laboratory in addressing their mission. So that's a nice part about it. So that they are funded. They actually all have a mission. Congress told them what to do, and they're all going there. And they're open to partnerships. So let's explore that a little bit more. Back one thing up here. So when I say about this, so technology transfer, we talk about this, and it's interesting because the term gets used in a couple different ways. We sometimes see the term come up as, some foreign countries basically appropriating technologies improperly, like a forced transfer. We don't like that definition. That's not ours. Ours is actually trying to do exactly what you see here. We're trying to take all of this great work that is paid for out of tax dollars that goes into the federal laboratories, the research and development projects, and actually try to make sure that that is connecting out to the marketplace. We can do lots of research, and it's really interesting and cool stuff. Yes, it's even rocket science in some cases, but really at the end of the day, if that doesn't make it into products and services that people can use, it isn't reaching its full potential. And in fact, the agency is not even achieving its mission. So what we try to do is partner people up with industry, because at the end of the day, as you all know, the government doesn't make stuff. My best example of this is always going back to all the vaccines that people talk about for COVID. It's not a government vaccine. There's a lot of government research that went into these vaccines, but it's a Moderna vaccine or a Pfizer vaccine or a J&J vaccine. There is some basic research in most cases that went into it from federal investment, but that's the goal of tech transfer. So every time you see someone, there needs to be this or there needs to be that, that's what we're talking about, is getting this investment, getting all of this brain power out of the labs and into some company that's going to make and sell some product or service and make it available to people so that you can buy it or use it. And in some cases, even if you're the Department of Defense, you're going to acquire it. So, if you think about a fighter plane, F-22 is not made by the federal government, it's bought. The company makes those things, Lockheed and Boeing, and they are sold to the government. So we need to transfer this out in order to get these technologies out there, even if it's something that the government's going to acquire. So that's our goal. And in some cases, it's just a matter of doing some training and joint research. We might not do necessarily licensing. That is not always our goal. But it is to make sure that we're transferring those things and throwing them out of the laboratories into somebody that can do something. So I made a bit of the case. Why is it important? Well, we spend billions of dollars, and frankly, it's kind of sits on a shelf if we don't do something with it. People can find stuff for free, and we all know that. You can put it into scientific journals. Frankly, it's a little bit more difficult for a company to find it. Think about a business plan and put it into effect if that's all we're doing with it. So it's really a matter of accomplishing that mission, but it also creates an economic benefit. And it does that nationally and also does it regionally. It creates jobs. It creates some churn of money. Hopefully good paying jobs in the community. Hopefully we increase manufacturing. I'll talk about US manufacture. Lately, that's a big push from the administration. Well, this is how you get new technologies into that. So that's the goal. And that's actually what we measure is, how are we benefiting the economy? And we're always trying to figure that piece of it out, as well as, again, always that mission space. By the way, feel free to ask questions as I go along too. Okay, so when we talk about doing this, what we want to do is make available, we've got over 100,000 scientists and engineers in highly technical areas across the spectrum. But how do we make those available? So we've got people, we've got unique equipment and facilities that are available. We've got some great stuff, but as I said, we don't make anything. So our success is really measured on, as I have your success here, but it is measured on the success of you or your partners, the businesses that are actually going to use these technologies or use the partnership in order to advance the technology into the marketplace. That's how we measure our success, is actually products reaching out and actually being commercialized. So it really is a goal of, we've got these lovely fences and we've got some very unique facilities and even some very secure facilities, but we want to actually make them accessible. And that is the goal of technology transfer. And we do this, and you do this often with these parks that you have, and you're very familiar with them outside some of these laboratories. that are certainly some very high security and high tech laboratories. But at the same time, again, their mission depends on this aspect, this whole commercialization and reaching out to partners. And really being part of that ecosystem. I think that's really the key in a lot of places. You got to bring together the people and the money and the businesses all towards achieving that goal. So how do we do this? Well, I mean, we've got a few key ways that we do it. We do patent and license stuff. Congress did say that federal laboratories can patent and license technologies. It's an interesting thing because when you get down to it, the goal of Congress is very clear what they want out of this. They want to use the patenting and licensing as a vehicle to get it into what they call practical application. Someone's going to use it, like I keep saying. It's not so much a moneymaker. I guarantee you it's not profitable for the government, but that's okay, because what you do when you do a patent and license is you do a couple things. First of all, you define what a technology is. So you put a box around it. You actually have a product that you can say, you know, I've got this thing, I know what it is, and I can transfer it now. And then I can also then measure progress, because as I said, Congress is practical application. One of the things you'll never see a lab do, because it's not allowed, is actually license it to somebody to stop it from being manufactured. And of course, sometimes technology displaces old technology, and it does then, you know, it competes in the same marketplace. So we don't play in that market. Our goal is always to get it out there, not to keep it off the shelf. Our biggest workhorse in many respects are things we call CRADAs, Cooperative Research and Development Agreements. These are super flexible agreements. They are paperwork. The government runs on paper, as everybody probably knows. We do lots and lots of paperwork. These things, though, are super flexible. You can do so many different things. The one thing you can't do with the CRADA is give the other party money. That's a contract or a grant. It's an acquisition, if you will. But other than that, in terms of partnering for research and development, we get tremendous flexibility with these agreements. You know, we can have the scientists go out, we can have people come in, we can share equipment, we can pass equipment back and forth. In fact, other parties can fund the research if they want to fund it. Money can come in, they can't go out. It's a one-way street with that piece of it, but it's very, very flexible in terms of supporting the mission of the agency. And what's really cool about these things is it doesn't run like a grant or a contract either. That isn't run under the acquisitions regulations. It's its own thing. So it's discretionary. The lab can choose the party they want to enter into the agreement with. So it's very flexible in that regard. It does put, you know, it mentions intellectual property. It gets into how you protect the intellectual property. It's a pretty well thought out piece of legislation actually that allows labs to do CRADAs. And they're a super flexible tool. And probably we don't even scratch the surface of the abilities to do things. We can get pretty creative in what we can do with these things. Other partnership agreements, there's lots of ways to partner. So CRADAs are great. I will, you know, as you just heard me sing the praises of these things, they're also sometimes overkill. You know, if you want to do something like it in a different way, there might be a better agreement. Maybe we just do a material transfer agreement or some sort of a way to shift the property around or use it. Lend, you know, we can loan things. Maybe there's other agencies that have special things, educational partnership agreements. We do lately data transfer agreements where we're just going to use data as opposed to materials, which is an interesting shift in the world as we move forward. But there's lots of different ways to do it. So I don't like to always necessarily say use this tool. There's lots of tools. And the bigger point is I go back a couple slides and say, we're trying to make sure we reach out to business in the way that business needs to work with us. And that's really the key to this whole thing is making sure that we're working with companies. Facility use, there are designated facility use, user facilities they're called. Where I used to work at NIST, there was a nanotech facility. Basically, it was not allowed to make a profit. They would charge for, you know, basically the fee for use, and that was about it. There's other ones that you can do under CRADA that frankly, you can use the facility potentially at no cost, depending how mission oriented it is that you're using the equipment underneath that agreement. So there's lots of ways to work these things out, and there's lots of really cool stuff out there. Other user facilities, some of you might be familiar with things like, you know, there's the advanced light source that's out at, what is it, Argonne, the advanced photon source, I believe is the Berkeley one. Could be the other way around, but, you know, there's some of these higher end physics tools that DOE runs that, you know, some of these are user facilities, but there's a number of facilities that are designated this around the country, and they're really just set up for companies to come in and use them. Or for science.
So Paul, let me ask you a question. Brian Darmody here. So if I'm a park or I have a company and there's a a federal lab nearby me, or maybe it's somewhere else. How do they find someone like you at a federal lab? Is there someone like you at every federal lab that can sort of talk? Maybe they just don't want to license the technology. They want to, use a facility, something. Does each federal lab have like a partnership coordinator like you?
Yes, and so that's an interesting one. Is actually, so it's required by law, so they all do, that every laboratory has some level of technology transfer office. Now, what's interesting, the larger laboratories will have a person, they'll actually have that on site. And so like you mentioned, Sandia, they have their own tech transfer office and they're working on site, and you're probably already working with the same folks in that office. Some organizations are slightly different. I'll give a good example is the Department of Agriculture. There's one large technology transfer office that works with all of the Department of Agriculture. Now they have some people in the different regions that do connections as well, but a lot of the things get sent back over to headquarters. But that's okay, because their whole goal is to actually get you back down in order to get you to the place. So there is an interest in this, and it is something every place, every laboratory, there is a connection that we have within our network to get you into that place in order to do technology transfer. Which is actually, to be honest with you, as a consortium, and I'm glad you asked that, is, that's actually one of our stronger suits. When you think about what we do, I'm not a federal employee anymore. I work now as supporting this federal lab consortium and all the federal labs. But this sort of is that piece that holds the labs together. If you think about each agency has their own unique mission and their own unique authority. The way our government is structured, there isn't like a Ministry of Science and Technology as in some countries. They act relatively independently. And so what ends up happening though is there isn't a place for all this to come together. Well, in this case, this consortium is the piece that can sort of fill in the mortar between all these bricks and hold it together into a cohesive whole. It's not that we run all the research programs, but we have the ability to connect you to the right people. And that's where we really fill in the gap there. They have great programs. And frankly, if you already know who you're working with, go work with them, because our goal is to connect you with them. But it's when you're trying to figure out where to go, that's where we come in. We also do some other things, but Corinne will talk about that as well. So we try to help, actually advance this as an enterprise. Okay, and as I said, hopefully that answered the question, but the other thing we do is tech assistance. And frankly, tech assistance is sometimes just as simple as saying, I'd love to ask a question to somebody that knows what they're doing, and we can often help with those things. Probably one of my favorite meetings in tech transfer was a guy that disappeared from the meeting, showed up later, and it's kind of like, well, maybe he just wasn't interested. It's like, oh, no. I met because we did this at the lab. It's like, no, I met a scientist who knew exactly what I needed. I didn't know he existed. I got all my questions answered, and cost me $12 for lunch. What a deal. And it was like that, to me, was a great example of tech transfer, because really we hit everything that we needed to hit. We didn't need an agreement type, but we did help this business. So it's really important. And that is actually within the mission of all of these laboratories. Okay, so when I talk about labs, like I said, it's very expansive. So we actually cover all federal laboratories across all agencies. If you're in the R&D budget, you are a part of FLC. Some of them are active than others, but in general, like we cover the full spectrum. So all of DoD, department. When you get down to the budget for the government, I will tell you, defense, energy, NIH, and NASA, you've probably got 80% of it right there in terms of the budget. But we do cover all of the agencies. In many, many different areas. We even have the CIA participate with us, which is an interesting one. But we do have even some of the spy agencies. And yeah, they're actually interested in technologies, not only in, but out, and actually vice versa. Sometimes they're just interested in bringing stuff in. So a lot of interest. And we do work very closely with some of the different organizations in terms of, like SBIRs, we're very close with the SBIR people because we tend to talk a lot to the same audiences, the small businesses and startups and people that are growing and launching new technology. So we do work very closely together, and we're able to pull across lots of different places. I think there's I always find interesting about these, there's some things that people never think of when it comes to research, like the National Park Service or the Forest Service. There is actually research that goes on in these places that might be particularly relevant to what people are trying to do. mean, one of the pitches I used to do, as I said, I used to work at National Institute of Standards and Technology, not a health organization. But when I talk to health groups, it's like, maybe what you want isn't necessarily NIH because you probably have expertise. Maybe what you want is something that's not in your area of expertise. So, think and consider some of these other agencies that might get exactly what you need as a business, as opposed to just sort of generically in that field. Kind of the other trick I'll always tell people, I would tell you right off the top, is if you find a party that's not interested, find somebody else. It's not worth it. It's not worth your time to try to find somebody that is interested in working with you. I think you all know this, but it's particularly true, I think, from government labs. There's lots of people that are working in different areas. There are some specialist areas, I do admit, but generally, if there's someone that's not interested, move on, find someone else. We can help do that as well. Well, I also find, sorry, go back to that one, the Space Force, that's the new organization that was created. And in fact, we do have some level of participation with them as well. So that's kind of exciting. Okay, so when I talk about the numbers of these things, just to give you an idea, so this is 2016, actually there's 2017 data out, but it doesn't get that different, to be honest with you. So volume wise, when you think about this, from a sheer intellectual property side, that is inventions and patents, to be honest with you, our numbers aren't very impressive. We don't patent everything. Our mission is to patent things only when we really think it's going to be commercialized, and that's the pathway towards commercialization. So, about 5,000 inventions a year, 2,500 patents. Like I said, here's my proof that it's not a money-making operation, not tons of income. But that's not really the point either. We do have royalties. The inventors get royalties. There's good reasons to do it, but it is not the major driver. CRADAs, on the other hand, we've got like 10,000 active CRADAs at any time. So we'll add another 5,000, like another 5,000 renewals every year plus. We do lots and lots of CRADAs. They are wonderful tools and we do tons of them. And when I talk about other agreements, like 20,000 other types of agreements that we actually collect and measure, that we know that they actually are signed agreements that exist in all these different formats. So there's many, many different ways to do this, lots of different folks that are interested in it. And the right mechanism is something that we work on folks with. Now, when you get down to what do we do and where do we do it, with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Corinne, who's going to talk a little bit about those things.
Hi, yeah, very nice to meet you all. I'm Corinne Hindenach. I'm Partnerships Manager for National Partnerships with the FLC. Thanks, Paul. You gave a really fantastic overview of most of the things that we do. And I'm going to go a little quick here. So you'll see there in the areas that our labs mainly operate in, we have plenty of opportunity for you and your constituency to join us. Lots of different types of research going on there, all over the spectrum of science and engineering. Next slide, please. Our main mission is, as we say, to promote, educate, and facilitate technology transfer for our 300 plus labs. Promote is really to say, hey, everybody, these are the things that our labs are doing. Come get engaged with us. And then education is best practices. How can tech transfer professionals better themselves within the federal space? What do they need to know? And we host seminars and trainings for them, as well as develop education packages. And then facilitate is really my space. That is the partnerships activity space. And that's really about engagement, creating tools, creating opportunities for various constituency bases to join in with our Fed labs and make their dreams come true, right? I mean, that's a little cliche to say, but hopefully that's what happens. Next slide, please. So we do this through our enhancing partnerships process. If you see on our website, we have what's called a lab locator service, and it goes into this a little bit more detail. This is basically me. You will talk to me. We will identify your needs. We'll search through laboratory resources and technologies to make sure that we've got the right folks that we're going to try and put you in the right room with. And then, as Paul said, we will set up a contact. If you're already working with those folks, again, you don't need to contact us, but if you don't know where to turn, we consider ourselves your open door to the federal laboratory space. Next, you'll go through the commercialization process, determining which exact method you would like to use so that you can get your needs met. Paul went over those types of methods with the CRADAs and licenses, as well as the facilities, et cetera, earlier in our presentation. So that was where we turn it over really in step 4 to you all, the institution and the lab. Next, please. The FLC is divided into 6 regions. You can see there where each region exists. On our website, you have the ability to search for individual labs and success stories within your region. Also, each region this year is going to host a technology showcase event, which are going to be really interesting and depend on the interest of that tech space in that region. So follow along with our newsletters, our website, et cetera, to potentially register for those. They are free and open to the public and provide a lot of resources to you. Next slide, please. I'm kind of going to speed through these two because these are some really cool examples of how FedTech has gotten out into the world. And these are from our award winners from the last year. We have a radiation-resistant bacteria-inspired USU BMI vaccine against polio and emerging superbug, which is pretty exciting. You'll see there that there are the Uniformed Services University was a partner in that. So, we do try to pair the labs with universities and university parks too when we can. Next slide, please. This one is a specific entrepreneurship program with TEDCO, 11 new startups and 2.7 million in annual revenue between NIST and TEDCO, and that's out in the Northeast region, or sorry, Mid-Atlantic region in Maryland there. Next slide, please. As Paul was mentioning, the kind of COVID response that we've had, this was a clinical trial where NIH and Gilead worked together to move forward a treatment for COVID-19 that now has emergency use authorization, which is fantastic. As a COPD sufferer, I'm really excited about that. Next slide, please. And everybody knows this one. This is a memory foam. You may sleep on this at night. It was developed by NASA and determined by an independent organization that it could be used for something other than airline seating vibration impact cushion. So hopefully you know what we're talking about there, and you have experienced that wonderful technology for yourself. Next slide, please. And then this one you're all familiar with if you have been through an airport recently. This is the wave screening for passengers that was developed out of the PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. It's Department of Energy, or sorry, Department of Defense and Homeland Security. And it's the one where you put your hands over your heads as you're going through the airport. Next slide, please. You recognize some of these products on the market, Gardasil, apple dippers, those sorts of things. And you can see more of those products on the market at our website, federallabs.org, and I will drop that here into the chat for you in a sec. Next slide, please. So really how we carry out that mission, again, that's that promote, educate, facilitate. Our main website is federallabs.org. You can find our awards, a program we have called Lab Tech in Your Life there. Lab Tech in Your Life will actually take you through a house that has a showcase of all of the Fed tech that you may experience in your home today. Also an airport, they went through and determined different areas of federal technology that are evident as you move through airport security and airports in general. Labs in Action are a success story, so you'll see opportunities there for you to potentially sync up with groups who have had successes in the past and know how to work with organizations like your own. FLC Learning Center is really more for that T2 professional. So if you're interested in technology transfer in general or technology transfer in the Fed space, it's a really good area to delve into and learn a bit more about. And then FLC Business is our tool that I dropped there into the chat that helps you find licensable technologies, facilities, equipment, et cetera, where we can pair you up with the right folks. Next slide, please. So really our partnerships here are, we have a pretty kind of broken into national and regional partnerships. Of course, some national organizations have regional chapters as well. As Paul mentioned, we work pretty closely with the Small Business Administration, also the Minority Business Development Agency. The Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International is one of our technical area partners. We're going to be at their event coming up here in Orlando at the end of April. And then the Water Council, who is a kind of regional, kind of national, kind of international group that we work with dealing with water. Our regional partnerships are New Jersey Commission on Science, Innovation, Technology, Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, Maryland Technology Development Corporation, and CoLabs. We've got a few others too now that are coming into the pipe work, but those are really those economic development ecosystem spaces that Paul was mentioning earlier that we want to work with and collaborate with, and you all could be part of that group. So if you're interested in joining up with us, let us know. Next slide, please. And this is the end here for us. So connect with us. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have YouTube. We have a general service account that's info@federallabs.org. You also have myself and Paul. As I said, I'm your lab locator service. So I am here for you any step of the way. If you are interested in working with the federal government, really at any research and development level, let me know and I can try and find you the best answer to put you in the right room with the right people. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Corinne and Paul. So if anyone, well, just a couple of comments. One, thank you. I was at an FLC meeting, before, when you had them in person, and I walked by the International Space Station and I thought to myself, they should be, I'm glad they were a member of the FLC because I saw them and I said, they should be a member of my organization. And actually they are our first research park in the sky. And we will have, and then I started learning about biomanufacturing in space, what they were doing. And they have lots of, universities as well as corporate partners doing advanced biomanufacturing in space. And so we're actually going to have them speaking at our BioHealth Caucus in San Diego before Bio opens in June 12th and 13th. So anyway, that all started at an FLC meeting. So you guys, you put that on your list of success stories.
Yeah, Brian, I think we need to make a slide for you. So that will be in our next presentation.
Yeah. No, it's been great. And now we have private sector companies, space companies like Space Tango in your neck of the woods and Louisville coming and speaking as well. So yeah, that's a great story. So can you guys talk a little bit about, I see because I'm near the Army Research Lab, they have this concept of an open campus, right? So I'm sensing a lot of federal labs, besides the patents, they want to figure out new pathways to connect with academia, research parks, the private sector. Can you talk a little bit, about how that works? And is that more on the individual lab level, I guess? Some Army Research Lab says we want to have an open campus.
So let me just throw out this. It's interesting because it's a little bit of both. So one of the things I find the most interesting is within this tech transfer legislation, and I can get into the legislation, and we talk about this a lot on the Fed side, so I'm sorry, but it's interesting within the actual legislation that sets up these tech transfer offices, it actually makes part of their mission to engage with state and local and regional economic development efforts. So the ability for them to integrate with the research park and preferentially work with the local economic development is actually built right into their mission. Which I don't think is most people realize, and it's actually not super common for most of the federal, it's usually we got to be really fair and do all. It's really much more engaged than that in terms of what the labs have the ability to do. Now, to your point, like something like the open campus, I mean, those concepts to a large extent are the idea that, look, we've got fences and razor wire all on this thing, but we want to get people to come in and work with us. I mean, want to get the companies to come in and work with the people on the campus. That's why you actually see some of them right outside the fence as well. But we can bring people in. It's certainly possible to do. And it is a matter of, in that case, having the commander of the base and the facility saying, look, I really want to push this. I need these companies in order to be successful in my mission. So that was actually a great example of a person that got it and got the idea that, I can't finish my mission without the final product actually being made.
So do any of our folks online anyone have any questions? You can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself or, and meanwhile.
Hi, this is Kerstin. I'm sorry, I had to, from Children's National, hospital in Washington, D.C., I had to step away for a minute, and maybe you talked about it and I missed it. But I had talked to some people from the federal labs before, and I know that some of them provide pilot programs or pilot awards for external organizations to collaborate with a federal lab. Did you talk about that, or is that true?
So there's a lot of different funding programs. Now, we don't always get involved necessarily in the external funding piece of it. It is slightly different. We do get involved in those different programs. I mean, SBIR is sort of the most common one, and people understand that one, I think, in general, in terms of pilots. Some of the other ones, there's like competitions are an interesting one, because there's actually special legislation that was put in place in order to let people partner in order to do some of those types of things as pilots as well. Most of the things that are, specific pilots, one of the things that's growing are these other transactions. And we do engage with some of those organizations that are doing it, but they're a little bit interesting because they're not always as published. But it's sort of a growing thing as well, as we learn how the labs operate in those spaces, which isn't a great answer in some respects. But those are some of the places to look for these pilots, particularly when you look at DoD, because there's a lot of these things, a lot of them end in WERX, and they are pilots, and they're all about funding new technologies in specific areas for DoD to acquire. So they want to fund the development. We do work with those organizations. They do participate, and we'll help push out if they want us to push stuff out. We'll push it out. But they do advertise a lot of their own thing. Believe me, they got lots of money to do it. So they're a little bit different on the pilot end of things.
Well, and let me just, so Kirsten, since you're speaking, I mean, the other opportunity, I think, especially for our research parks, is federal labs as tenants, right? I mean, Kirsten, you got BARDA has leased space at Children's National Innovation Campus. I know at the University of Maryland Discovery District, we have an element of Pacific Northwest National Lab. It's not the whole lab, but they've rented some space. So, I mean, we, as our organization, we'd love to have federal labs as tenants, right? Because that's great and neutral partnering ground. But that's a procurement, and But I mean, do you have any from an FLC perspective? How would if you're a park, how would you approach a federal lab? Say, hey, why don't you lease some space in my park? I mean, to me, that's a great partnering opportunity, but it's probably not in the remit of the FLC. But or is it?
It's not directly. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of our laboratories do exist within some of the space. So you think of sort of like the RTP space is a great example. But within RTP, there's multiple federal laboratories. I know when I worked at EPA for a while, we have a couple laboratories down in RTP. Like, for example, NIH has the NIHS piece. That institute actually is in RTP as well. In a lot of cases, we're integrated with some of the existing parks. And I think I think most of those organizations are active. Maybe they can be more active in them, but also getting the interest in the community. Like I said, these regional sector growth areas, they actually are a pretty good place to approach the labs. Now, the FLC, the tech transfer side, is kind of an interesting one on this one, because that's not really directly in what they're doing, but it is connected to what they're doing. So in terms of getting someone out there, like a smaller office space, in order to make those connections, that is in line with what they do. And that actually would be probably not that hard to convince somebody to really get into the mission space. The biggest thing when you talk to these folks by far is trying to figure out what it is. I keep using that mission word. That's the driver for everything that they do. It's interesting, as I always describe, or one of our attorneys, when I worked as a Fed, always told me if you're a private citizen, you can do whatever you want unless it's illegal. When you're thinking on the federal side, it's the exact opposite way of thinking. And this actually helps a lot when you start dealing with an agency. Agencies are only allowed to do what they're authorized to do. So there actually has to be something that they can say, this says I'm allowed to do that, which is why I talk a lot about laws and regulations. So when you're thinking about what it is they do, it actually has to be within their authorization to perform that work. And if you can connect to it, it's generally something they can move forward with.
And I see Corin put a good example of the Air Force Research Lab. I did read about this with Cornell in the Mideast, Mideast, and Purdue, I guess in the Midwest, creating a new ecosystem. And Purdue has a bunch of research parks. So that's a great example.
Yeah, and sometimes those opportunities, as Paul said, we're happy to push those out through our network. So if you are on our email list, or if you follow us on any of those social spaces, you'll often see those opportunities come up. I know that Paul mentioned a DoD. There's a DoD push right now where they're looking to develop these types of partnerships that you'll see in our kind of news archives. And then we also have education and training newsletters that come out on Thursdays every week that have opportunities for you to see what those labs are doing. And if there's something in there where you say, oh my goodness, ISS is doing this thing that I feel like my university research space would be really interested in collaborating with them, you have an easier access point to get to talk to them from those types of opportunities beyond just going through us. That's just more of a brainstorming opportunity for you to see what's out there. But if you do have those individual questions about specific labs that you want to work with, again, you can always talk to us.
And Michael Rosen, our colleague in Chicago, asked about VA part of the consortium. And, VA labs, VA is interesting because oftentimes they're consolidated with the local hospital, and, sometimes they are hospital employees, not VA employees. So can you talk a little bit about VA and tech transfer?
The VA is interesting. They do have an active tech transfer program. They are one of these consolidated offices where there's one tech transfer office in Washington that works with the whole VA system. So I will say that exists. John Kaplan is the gentleman's name who runs that. But they're very active. They're interesting in that they actually have what they call dual appointments for most of their researchers. And so they will often be a dual appointment with, let's say, a university or another provider, as well as a federal employee. I will say that arrangement is kind of unique to VA. So it is just sort of a little bit of a different twist in dealing with that particular organization. In a lot of ways, it gives them a lot of flexibility, but to be perfectly honest with you, sometimes it's actually easier rather than harder.
And you'll usually be able to find a list if your institution that you're affiliated with works with the VA. You can generally ask your HR or research enterprise for a list of dual appointees. I used to work at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, and we had a VA dual appointee list. As a compliance person for the intellectual property space, I had to deal with that every year. So it's usually very comprehensive. And then you can find out what those appointees are doing, both in your space and in their space as well.
Great. Any other?
I see one about the local VA. And as I said earlier, you want to work with a consolidated one of the builders for that. They will work you back out to the on the ground folks. Don't think that they just take it all back in, but they do work with each of the different organizations. And then they take the staff and they divide them up by organizations so that they got coverage.
Yeah, they divide them by region too. And I believe from the last person that I talked to who was the tech transfer rep for the VA, they were, prior to the pandemic, they were obligated to go visit their region at least a couple times a year. So you could go and schedule a meeting with them when they were around. So and if you want me to, Michael, I'm happy to, if you send me an email, I'm happy to put you in touch with those VA folks who are in your region, so you can get in touch with them.
So Dan Duncan, our colleague from Nebraska, asked about IP negotiations with universities. And he says, anecdotally, he's heard there's some cases that this can be a big issue with collaboration. I guess with the IP from the federal lab on a joint project. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's an issue between two universities, but how bringing in the federal lab, that can be an issue. Can you talk about that?
So this is one of these things that's kind of an interesting fact. And I think most people probably don't even realize that most of the federal inventions, I would probably say more than half, are actually jointly owned with universities. So it's more common than uncommon, actually, with federal laboratories. And in fact, there's a lot of different collaborations where we're already having a collaboration between the federal laboratory at the university. Good example, I know with Maryland was like the Joint Quantum Institute, which was a NIST in the University of Maryland in quantum science. And in fact, it's sort of one of those leading things, and it's really taking off too, with the group of all the, actually companies getting built around quantum science now. But it is one of those things, it's interesting because it's really very straight from the Fed side. It's relatively straightforward in the statute. When it comes down to something like it's a funded agreement, the university always has the ability to take the lead on patenting under Bayh-Dole. Now, that doesn't mean that the feds just relinquish their rights. And so that's where you have to negotiate. I would highly recommend it's best to have an agreement up front in terms of what that looks like. People, a lot of the researchers, they don't like to talk about these things going in, but it sure helps on the other side when you kind of come out of it on the other side. But it is one of those things that rights can be consolidated. It's actually, it's right in the statute. It's easy to do.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, Paul, so we just held our international conference in Salt Lake City and at the University of Utah Research Park, and we have an award. And so it's typically given to a technology company in a research park, and the one that won in Utah was IonQ, which is the first publicly traded quantum computing company. And that spun out of, the Joint Quantum Institute at NIST and the University of Maryland. So there's another great, check the box kind of thing that fits your, what we're all collectively trying to do. Can you talk a little bit about, you have an annual conference and it was going to be in Cleveland. And can you talk a little bit about the conference and how people might get involved with that?
Absolutely. So as Corinne had put up earlier, and it's in the chat, we're at federallabs.org. We do an annual conference, and unfortunately, we've not been able to do it the last 2 years in person with COVID. Unlike most of the world, as you probably saw even with the State of the Union, it's interesting because probably most people are going like, really? Where the president saying, we need to get the federal workers back in the office. And yeah, the federal workers are not back in the office yet. And so we kind of got to the point where there are too many travel restrictions for us to do an in-person meeting. We were actually planning to do it in April. So it's going to be April 5th through 7th in Cleveland. We just aren't able to get people traveling yet. Even when they say they can, sometimes the burden is so high that it's never going to happen. Like DOD had one where it was the, you can travel, but the commander for each person has to do a risk assessment, evaluates the risk, and then compare. And it's like, by the time you're done, it's like, you're not traveling. So once we get past that, well, we will meet in person again, but we're not this year. So we're looking probably at June, and it will be online again as a virtual meeting, and you're all welcome. Our meetings are open. We really don't have closed events. So all of our different, this meeting, now this one focuses a lot on the business of tech transfer, but we also would love to talk to some of the folks like you from research parks, which would be pretty awesome actually, because we want to really connect. We also do technical, so I'll just keep going with, we also do technical showcases. So one of our big shifts where we used to do more regional meetings just that were not different too much in scope international. What we're doing with our regional ones are really focusing on technology topics. So they're picking a topic and trying to connect with the locals, the companies, the universities, the investors around a specific technical topic to bring in experts and actually do some transactional work as well. So we're hoping to facilitate more of that. And those will be more towards the fall. So June is, we don't have an exact date yet, but late June is really the expectation for our national event. And then there's a series of regional events that will be coming up as well.
We also have, real quick, we also have a monthly member connect and lab showcase space. Again, you can find that either in that region space that I just dropped in there or through any of our outlets where we have our member labs get together and talk about things. And if you want to drop into that, you're welcome to as well. As Paul said, those are free and open to the public. So feel free to join in.
And just to clarify, so if I reach out to Corin, you are a free, or Paul, you're a free service, right, Jeff, for an initial call, right? I mean, you guys are open. It's a great example of something that's out there. And I think more parks should know about you guys because, getting regions together, it's quite clear from, the EDA Build Back Better regional hubs, they really want to see federal labs, universities, research parks, community colleges, HBCUs and others working together. So I think, if they don't know that person, at least you might be able to make the introduction. So that's, I think, a great opportunity that the FLC can provide our community.
Sure, and we're free beyond the initial call. So I actually we're free. We're basically taxpayer funded under the cooperative agreement. So we're here for you to help you do the best job you can and help our labs get their technologies out into the world. So I actually have a pretty great working relationship with a consultant who helps with SBIR grants out in the Pacific Northwest area, who every time they run up against a wall, they send me an email and they're like, hey, my researcher is hitting this space where we need to further reduce their invention to practice, and we don't have access to these facilities, or we don't have access to a technology that could expand their portfolio so they could actually get more investment. Do you have that? And then I'll go through with them. I probably talk to them once every 2 weeks on different projects and put them together with start out with 5 labs and see where it goes from there. And usually we find at least 1 or 2 that they can work forward with. And I'm happy to do that with any of your research parks as well. You can always think of us as a resource for your tenants, for your businesses who are in the research parks, to really expand their network out and build on their technology base.
We'll just give a quick plug. Like Corinne is working on a project actually with EDA right now, trying to build out some of this approach, government-wide approach to economic ecosystems, and some of what they're working on across their Build Back Better programs.
Yeah, we're developing specific resources that are geared towards the people who were awardees for the Build Back Better program, to make sure that their constituency, the folks who are going in and using those hubs, are able to understand what we can offer. And again, that is a free service that we can pair them up with those world-class researchers and facilities.
Well, yeah, and that's what, we've had we had the EDA Build Back Better folks on a peer-to-peer a couple months ago, because a lot of our members are part of, the consortia that at least are in this phase of the planning grants. And I guess we'll see who wins in September, the larger amount of money, which, by the way, can be used for research parks and accelerators and incubators. That's right in the allowable costs for those grants. Well, great. I think we're nearing the end. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Corinne, for your help. And we love working with you guys. And, let's continue the conversation. And I want Diana to come back on and remind us when our next peer-to-peer. And then also, I don't want to forget to mention our introduction to research parks in Delaware. And then we will have our BioHealth Caucus in June, and then our international conference in Toronto in September.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you everyone who attended the peer-to-peer today. The next peer-to-peer will actually be on the 3rd week of April 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I don't believe we have a topic yet for that, but be on the lookout for communication and for reminders from the Zoom link. Just as a reminder, this is recorded and will be on our YouTube page at the end of the week. If you have any questions or anything with in regards to accessing your AURP account or any AURP resources, please reach out.
Great.
With that, I will stop recording, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all.